But we'll go ahead and jump on in. So good afternoon. Happy Tuesday afternoon. Thank you for joining today as we chat about application of reading 5.3 for grades 5 through English 1. This is a part 2 of a two-part session. Um, and I know we've got some people who were here for part 1 and a couple people who might be joining for the first time. So we are going to go ahead and jump on in. A little bit of housekeeping. The first thing, introduction. So my name is Casey Prince Harvey. I work at the South Carolina Department of Education in the Office of Assessment and Standards on the standards side. And I support actually all of our content areas, K-12 on their standards review, revision, and approval process. But my background is teaching high school English, so I really live within the ELA team. And I am joined today by my ELA counterparts. I have Mandy Hawker, who is our elementary ELA education associate on the standard side, and then Brenna McCormick, who is our secondary ELA education associate, also on the standard side. And we are here to support your work in the implementation of our new ELA standards. So anything that we can do to support that work, we are here to do. And with this being sort of a small group, I would love to hear or read in the chat who is with us and where you are from. So if you would drop your name and where or who you serve across our state. And then I know I said I wasn't going to talk about the Olympics this time, but I'm going to do it anyway because I can't stop thinking about it. Um, so I was talking to my husband about this last night. There's something about the Olympics where every 4 years, I feel like I become an expert in a really obscure event, something that I would never watch any other year, but all of a sudden it's on the Olympics and I am into it. So, I would love to hear what, if you do watch the Olympics, what sport, what event do you get really into? Or which one do you watch and feel like you could probably place somewhere in that event if you just had a little bit of practice? It's definitely not gymnastics or swimming for me, but maybe table tennis. I feel like I could do some table tennis. Um, I see archery or air rifle. I feel like archery, and they've got like these really intricate setups for archery. And I'm like, I know I could hit a bullseye at least once. The synchronized swimming, Vanessa, I am obsessed. I love the synchronized swimming. Um, oh, diving, synchronized diving. That's it, that's intense. Couldn't do it, but you want to surf. And surfing is new this time around, isn't it? Is that one of the new ones that was added in the last few iterations? I see gymnastics, rugby. I don't watch rugby normally, but like I have really gotten into rugby this time around. And Emily, yep, your Little League World Series, love it. Cross country horse racing, yeah. And even the Winter Olympics, I was talking at lunch with a couple of coworkers about the biathlon. Is that what it is? Where they do the skiing and then they stop and then they do some other stuff and then they get back on the skis. Um, there's just all kinds of interesting stuff to watch. But I do feel like I could probably uh, place in some table tennis. I don't know. Um, fantastic. And I'm seeing a good representation from across our state here. Thank you, those of you who are in your classrooms already and, busy. I know you've got your bloodborne pathogens to watch and your Power School to set up and all of those things. So thank you for taking a little bit of time today to come and hang out with us and chat about application of reading 5.3. Couple of other things for our housekeeping that I want to share. Our landing page and our attendance. Brenna is going to drop those in the chat for you. So our landing page is going to have all of our resources for today, including the link to the attendance, but we've linked it separately in the chat as well. That part is going to be important for you to fill out for recertification credit. But you can access all of our other links and things through the landing page. And then an additional reminder here for this session today, we are going to be talking about some instructional resources and some instructional examples and ideas to get you started as you prepare for your planning and instruction around application of reading 5.3. But just a reminder that these examples are some of many examples. And because curriculum is determined and selected at that local level, we want to encourage you to refer to and consult your high quality instructional materials for support as well. You will have new textbooks, coming out to your district and your school. So just make sure that you're referring to those resources. And then what we have here are just some examples that can supplement. All right. So speaking of attendance that was dropped in the chat and on the landing page, we are happy to remind you that we are able to offer 1 hour of recertification credit for each hour of webinar participation. We do have 3 requirements for receiving that recertification credit, all the documentation that we need to have. The first is what you're doing right now, which is attending live and actively participating, whether that be in the chat or when we do some activities, just making sure that you're actively participating, remaining in attendance for the duration, and then completing both the attendance form at the beginning and then our feedback form at the very end. So that helps us capture both that beginning and end. So let me pause right here for just a second and make sure everyone has access to the attendance form. Is there anyone, and you can just tell me in the chat if you still need access to the landing page or to the attendance form. And if so, we can just drop that back in the chat for you. Just to make sure you have what you need. So take just a moment if you haven't already to complete that attendance. Let me grab that. Hold on.
Casey, some people are having trouble with the chat, so what I'll do is I'll email it to those people.
That sounds good.
And we have a hand raised, but it might be the same situation. Access.
Pasadena, is that you?
Mm-hmm.
Good. Okay. Okay. Yep. I'm looking at the chat now, and yeah, I can see some of you are having issues accessing. We'll get those emailed out to you so you can access everything. All right. I'm gonna continue on. All right. As I mentioned at the very beginning, this is a 2-part session. This is the second of the 2-part session on application of reading 5.3. If you attended any of our other middle level webinar sessions throughout this summer, you'll be familiar with this structure. We're following the same structure as each of those other sessions. But part 1 we hosted on Friday afternoon, July 26th, and that session was a deep dive into application of reading 5.3. We looked at the vertical articulation, discussed the shifts in content and complexity, and then pulled out some of that academic language, as well had some discussion about the key terms. And we just got the recording back right about lunchtime today. So I have posted it. I emailed it out if you registered for that session, and then I have linked it on the landing page as well. So if you did not attend or you weren't able to, you should be able to go back and access the recording. Today's session is going to be all about the instructional applications. So following that similar format to the other sessions this summer. And we will do a little bit of a review of part 1 before we jump into the instruction, just so everyone is on the same page. So that leads us to our purpose for today, which is to explore the instructional strategies for AOR 5.3 for grades 5 through English 1 in order to enhance instruction and improve student outcomes. And just a reminder, like I said, this is part of our middle level summer series. In fact, this is the very last session in our middle level summer series. And Brenna and Mandy, correct me if I'm wrong, this is the last webinar we have this summer. We have hosted 20 plus webinars this summer. We have been real busy. And each of those grade bands has had their own series that we have hosted where we focused on different things. So this session, and we moved, yes, we moved buildings. And we've been around the state doing PD. We've had a lot going on. It's been a very busy summer. Yep. So for the middle level series, each of those sessions was in 2 parts where we did that overview and then the instructional application. And we've done that for 3 specific standards within the middle level grades. And the purpose for that, we've got some questions. Why did we pick those? Why are we focusing on those? And we selected the ones where there were the most significant shifts. Or clarified the biggest misconceptions or language. In this case, we've been looking at rhetoric with AOR 5.3, which is a major shift for our middle level teachers from the high school level down to 6th grade. All right. To get us thinking about that instructional practice piece, now that we've had a little bit of an opportunity to gain that clear understanding of the expectations for those grade level indicators, and specifically the indicators we've discussed in this series, we should also consider the practices that we use to provide the instruction and support. And we've discussed this idea in some of our previous webinars, and I felt it was important for us to bring back up and have some discussion about again. So there's an article that Brenna just dropped in the chat called Better Than Best Practice. It's one that we shared across the state during our regionals this last academic year. And I wanted to pull a quote from it. It says, if you truly want to be the best, you've got to realize that practice implies not perfection, but an ongoing habit of working to improve. And the term best implies an absolute. So best practices is really an oxymoron. So on our team, we tend not to use the term best practice because that assumes that there's nothing that you can do to improve. But as we know, we should always be working towards improvement, learning and growing. So as we talk about our instructional practices today, I want us to consider that and frame it from the lens of a better practice, right? Now that we know a little bit more, we have a clearer understanding of these grade level indicators, we can apply that in a better practice. So let's go ahead and get started with our review of application of reading 5.3. We'll do a little bit of that overview to frame the work for today. So if you attended session 1, or you're planning to go back and do that review, one of the things that we did was take a good bit of time to look at the vertical progression for application of reading 5.3. We're going to drop that in the chat and take just a couple moments to pull it back up and do that quick review of the vertical articulation, which again, this is taking just that one standard and it's giving us the vertical progression from kindergarten all the way through English 4. So we can see where skills and content are introduced and how they develop over time to get us to our end goal of the standard that's at the top. So as you take about 2 minutes just to look at that, I want you to drop in the chat any key terms, concepts, or general noticings that you have. So anything that stood out to you in terms of language, in terms of expectation, and particularly for the grade levels that you teach or support. So take about 2 minutes, pull up the vertical progression, and then drop in the chat anything that stuck with you. We'll come back together at about 2:17. right, take just about another minute to drop your ideas in the chat. As you are doing that, I'm just scrolling back up so I can look at some of the responses. I see rhetorical appeal, and the language of rhetorical appeal will be new to students and somewhat new to teachers. The emphasis on types of reasoning as opposed to just reasoning in general. Tracing the development in grades 6 through 8. Yep, absolutely. Reasoning and rhetorical appeals in 6th grade. Oh, have claim and argument as interchangeable terms, and it looks like that is a misconception. Yes, so we will clarify some of that language. I want to say on your landing page, I have the link to the glossary. That is one area that we really focused on in part 1, is just making sure we have access to some of that academic language that's specific to the indicators, and knowing that our glossary is a resource that is aligned to the intent of our indicators. So we don't have to pull random things from random places. We have a definition for claim. We have a definition for argument. We have a definition for trace and reasoning and rhetorical appeals. We got it all. Let's see. The importance of understanding what comes before and after your grade level standard. Yes. Personally, I will say that the vertical progression, this is Appendix B of our standards document. It gives us every single standard in this vertical format. And personally, it's my favorite iteration because I like to see how things are introduced and how they develop over time, right? I want to know what my piece of the puzzle is, but also where they were coming to me from and where they're going to be going when they leave. Absolutely. I see 5th grade tracing the development while identifying rhetorical appeal of ethos, pathos, logos. Yes, for elementary grades, new components, opinion, facts, topics, reasons, claim, beginning to trace in 5th grade all the way through middle school. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that. And then as we move into high school, looking at analysis and comparison, and then eventually moving into that evaluation piece, where evaluation and critique are the highest levels of complexity in our standards. Compared to where we left off in 2015 with English 4, 2024 is a much deeper dive. There's much more nuanced instruction and opportunity as students are moving into those high school courses. And that is because of that shift down into those middle level grades. And yes, as someone mentioned, 6th grade, there is a lot of heavy lift in terms of language, the introduction of that content of types of reasoning, rhetorical appeal of ethos, pathos, logos. But that also they're going to trace the development of that author's argument over 4 grade levels, right? And then the complexity around the types of reasoning and the rhetorical appeals is what's going to develop. So there's not, after 6th grade up through 8th grade, there's not going to be new content introduced. So they're just going to go deeper into that new content. Absolutely. So I did pull out, we had some discussion about this in part 1, but just that reminder of where new vocabulary and content is introduced throughout that vertical articulation. So we can see here in kindergarten through 4th grade, we have opinion, facts and topic, reasons, claim, and then evidence in 4th grade. They move into argument and tracing the development of an argument in 5th grade, and then 6th grade is where we have that heavy hitter. So that's where they're going to learn about types of reasoning. We list 3 types of reasoning: inductive, deductive, and causal in our standards and in the glossary definition. We have rhetorical appeals, and then ethos, pathos, logos. And then we can see 7th, 8th, and then into English 1, there's no new vocabulary, but that's where that complexity will shift, right? And deepen. As we discuss our instructional strategies today, we are going to give some strategies for each of these grade levels that are aligned to the intent of their indicator. You'll notice that several specifically relate to the introduction of some of these new terms, and in some cases will reinforce prior language. So really pulling in that information and connecting back to those definitions from our glossary. All right, so we did not get a chance to fully dive into this in session one, so I did want to pull out and build in some time for us to do it today. So because rhetoric and that introduction of rhetoric into the middle level grades is such a new undertaking and a shift for those middle level teachers, we do have a lot of support on our instructional resources page. So we have not only a rhetoric support document, but 4 supplements. And each of those is going to serve a unique purpose to support teacher planning and instruction. So I want to take a moment just to give you a brief overview of what each of these are, and then give you some time to dive into them. So the overall rhetoric support document is going to pull out those middle level and then fifth and English 1 indicators around 5.3, as well as communication 1, which is writing arguments, because that's also going to incorporate rhetoric, where students are using that information in their own writing. It's going to give you key vocabulary and those key terms similar to what we have already talked about, as well as some specific insights and some additional support around specific aspects of rhetoric. Then underneath that, we have these 4 bullets. Those are called the supplements. So they are really targeted 1 to 2 pagers that are going to give you really specific information about individual aspects of rhetoric from that progression. So if you're a teacher who maybe needs that refresher on Eat Those, Paint Those logos, there's a supplement that just talks about that and gives you those definitions and some, some additional information. If you feel good about instruction on Eat Those, Paint Those logos, but maybe you need support in the types of reasoning and what our 3 are with definitions and examples, you'll want to look at the types of reasoning supplement. We also have a supplement called the Rhetorical Devices Supplement. Now, I will say there are no specific rhetorical devices that are explicitly named in our standards. So it's not that students are going to have to know specific rhetorical devices, but they want to be familiar with what rhetorical devices are. So we have some example rhetorical devices. We give some examples of what those look like in text, as well as some definitions. And we have taken some examples of figurative language, which is listed in our standards, and we've given the definition from our glossary and how that figurative language could be used rhetorically. So it's a great resource if you're wanting to provide some instruction around that, just to make sure students are well grounded in rhetorical devices. And then lastly, we have the rhetorical triangle supplement, which is going to give you that Eat Those, Paint Those logos in that triangle organization. So couple of things there really to suit whatever your needs are as you are planning to provide that instruction on rhetoric. So we're going to do a little bit of a read, note, and plan, so you have time to dive into this. We'll do about 6 minutes. And Brenna's already put the links to all of these in the chat. They're also on your landing page. What I want you to do is read one of those documents. Just pick whichever one you feel like you might want a little bit of a deeper dive on. Note how this document might support your instruction. How do you feel like you could use that? Are there definitions? Are there examples? Is there just clarification that's going to help you as you are building out your instruction? And then plan how you could use that document for your next steps. So I know I can do X with this. So we'll take about 6 minutes for you to dive into one of those documents. Any takeaways that you have, you can add to the chat, and then we will come back together at 2:31. Okay, go ahead and get started. We're right under the halfway mark. And we'll come back together at about 2:31. We have a little over 1 minute left, so now would be a great time to start formulating your takeaways in the chat. See, a couple people have already dropped some things so far, which is fantastic. But if you have not already, you might want to go ahead and start gathering your thoughts in writing. All right. Oh, golly, that timer. I don't know if y'all could hear it, but it's like that alarm buzzer that just like jolts you out of bed. All right, I'm taking a look. A lot of you have mentioned the types of reasoning supplement as being one of those areas where you feel like there's a good bit of support with those examples that you can provide to students. Emily, I love your response about using that Ethos Pathos logo supplement to build out anchor charts, which is fantastic. I love that so many of you are finding value in the rhetorical devices supplement. And, even though we don't specifically list, um, individual rhetorical devices that students will be expected to know, it's very good for them to have that background and to have those tools in their toolkit that they can use in a variety of situations. Let's see. Um, Oh, I love the idea of taking the Ethos Pathos logos supplement, maybe using it as a way to build out a Padlet. Um, yes, and types of reasoning is going to be quite an undertaking, particularly for our middle level students, which is again why um, there's not, after 6th grade into 8th grade, there's no new content introduced. We're just building on those skills. So what a great opportunity to maybe do some vertical planning. If you have a team at your school who is able to do that, maybe build out and see what that could look like across those 3 years, so that each person has their little piece of the puzzle. Absolutely. Let's see. 5th grade, the language you use for TDA English for support your claim by citing evidence from the text was struggling with how to. Okay, so Casadena, when it comes to that assessment piece, with that shift from TDA to TDW, I think the assessment quick links is going to be your best friend. So our development partners have already put out a lot of really helpful information on that shift from TDA to TDW. And I can put that on the landing page real quick for you before the end of today, where you can access their webinar where they talk about the shift as well as the rubrics for all of those grade levels with what those modes of writing are, and also the item specifications. So that language will be really helpful if you're trying to provide support around that piece. Let's see. Using the rhetorical triangle document with the content of the Ethos Pathos logo supplement could be a great resource for hands-on activities. Absolutely. Reasoning can be used in support of science standards. Oh, what a great idea, Latrice. I love that. Let's see. Just looking down. Oh, one thing I wanted to mention, because I got a question about this yesterday when I was in another part of the state doing some professional learning. Sixth grade teachers have noted in that rhetoric support document the mention of alternative perspective when students are writing their arguments. So in writing communication 1, which is writing arguments, students are expected to acknowledge an alternative perspective. In 7th grade, that then shifts to counterclaim. And then in 8th grade, they refute the counterclaim. So we've definitely gotten some questions about what exactly is that shift from 6th grade to 7th grade with alternative perspective into counterclaim. One of the revisions that you will see shortly in these documents, because we do kind of revise these on about a yearly basis, these support documents, is a little bit of clarification on alternative perspective and counterclaim. So essentially with 6th grade, what students are doing is just acknowledging that someone might have a different opinion than them, right? I like cats, but other people might prefer dogs. In 7th grade, they start shifting into counterclaim, which is where we start building in some of the reasons and evidence to go along with that differing opinion. And then in 8th grade, they're going to then refute. So it's sort of building blocks along the way. But that is one of those things with our updates to the rhetoric support document, there will be a section added that will provide that clarification. So just in case anyone had any questions, figured I would go ahead and make sure you knew that support was on the way for that as well. All right. Oh, Beth, you just did anchor charts for Ethos Pathos logos. Fantastic. I love to hear it. So hopefully this gives you a couple of actionable next steps that you can take as you are prepping for this upcoming school year. So with that, we'll shift over into some discussion on evidence-based instruction before we move into some grade level application. So over the last 2 sessions, we've provided a couple of resources to talk about evidence-based practices and the difference between an evidence-based practice and a research-based practice. For our purposes today, I'm not going to give us a new resource. I want to provide you with the resources that we shared in the previous section so you can jog your memory. So on your landing page and then in the chat, we're going to put both of the resources that were discussed in the last few sessions. There is an article on evidence-based versus research-based practices. And then underneath that, there is a video from Barbara Foreman talking about evidence-based practices. So you can pick whichever one of those you want to take a look at. This is totally independent. We'll give you just a few minutes to take a look at those. And then as you're looking at that, I want you to jog your memory. So review the resource of your choice, jot down any important ideas or new thinking. And then based on your review, offer one way that you incorporate evidence-based practices in your work. Is there something that you already do and know that you do? Or maybe is there something that might fit into that G category? Reflect on how you can apply any new learning in this section to grow as an educator. So pick whichever of those 2 resources you want to look at. We'll take for this one, we'll do about 4 minutes. Okay, so about 4 minutes for you to look at that resource, jot down any important thinking, and then consider what you're already doing or how you might use that information to grow when it comes to evidence-based practices. All right, so we'll come back together at 2:42. Okay, go ahead and get started. So again, as you are reviewing the resource of your choice, go ahead and think about what it is that you're already doing to incorporate evidence-based practices into your work, or how you could use the learning from that resource in order to grow when it comes to evidence-based practices. Take just another minute or so as you formulate your ideas. Go ahead and drop some of that in the chat. I'd love to see your thinking. All right, go ahead and drop any thinking into the chat from your review of these resources. Was there something that already aligned with what you do? Is there something that you do that you can share? Or is there something where you feel like you might need to grow? All right, Ellen and Love, you pulled out those keywords: validated, trustworthy, reliable, valid. Let's see. Oh, the importance of evidence-based practice when examining data to impact student outcomes. Um, so what evidence is going to support that students are meeting those goals? Let's see. Research-based practices or thought-filled techniques, but might not show sustained, repeatable success. Definitely need to invest in those research or those evidence-based practices. Absolutely. And I wanted to pull a little bit here from our findings as well. So evidence-based actually, let me start with research-based. So research-based is based on theoretical and initial research findings, supported by initial research and theory, may not yet be widely tested or proven in diverse practical applications, which is what our classroom settings are, right? There may still, or they may still be in an experimental stage or nearly in an implementation phase, whereas our evidence-based practices are based on empirical evidence demonstrating effectiveness in those real world settings. So we know that they're effective because they have been used and tested. There is extensive high quality empirical research showing consistent and positive outcomes. And widely implemented and proven effective in various educational settings, which again, that's what our classrooms are. So in this case, for our purposes today, we're focusing on those evidence-based practices and strategies. And why is that? Well, let's talk about the Every Student Succeeds Act. So ESSA or ESSA, that is the federal law that governs public education. And so it defines evidence-based instruction as an activity, strategy, or intervention that has a statistically significant effect on improving outcomes. ESSA also requires educators to implement evidence-based interventions, which are practices or programs that have been shown to be effective at improving outcomes. So we want to make sure that we are meeting that by intentionally choosing and using practices and strategies that are rooted in evidence. So those decisions that we make when choosing instructional strategies and techniques are incredibly important because they should be intentional, right? We want to teach students to be intentional in the choices they make. We need to be intentional in the choices that we make when we provide that instruction. So each of the strategies that we're going to look at in this next section are going to be rooted in that evidence-based research. We've chosen these things on purpose to meet a specific need. And before we take a look at them, we're going to dive a little bit more into the lens that we're going to view these practices through. So one way of looking at evidence-based practices is through the work of John Hattie, which many of you may be familiar with. We have talked about Hattie's work over the last sessions. He is most known for his extensive work in evaluating the effectiveness of teaching strategies and other factors that influence student achievement. He is most renowned for his development of the concept of visible learning, which we've linked his site on the landing page. Visible learning is a comprehensive synthesis of now nearly 1,200 meta-analyses. I thought it was originally, I think it was 800, and now over time it's developed to over 1,200 meta-analyses relating to student achievement. He's compiled all of that to determine which strategies have the most significant impact on learning, and he introduced the concept of the effect size, which measures the influence on different factors on learning outcome. So effect size is a statistical measure. It indicates the strength of the relationship between a factor and student achievement. So what we have here on the screen is that barometer of influence. If you have seen Hattie's work or familiar with it, and when we look at this and we look at those effect sizes, you might be wondering, if you haven't seen it before, what does that mean? So Hattie uses that benchmark of 0.4 as the average effect size. He refers to it as the hinge point, which is equivalent to an average year of growth. So any strategies with effect sizes above that 0.4 are considered to have a significant positive impact and can potentially accelerate student learning. So when we focus on the strategies today and we look at some of the examples that I'll share with you, we will have pulled specific strategies and effects that are above that hinge point. So we're going to reference that multiple times throughout this session. So what teaching effects are above that hinge point? Well, I've got a little bit of a screenshot here with a link as well in the chat that's going to give you that ranking of all of those different influences with what the effect sizes are. So this is what we referenced in addition to a lot of different resources on that Visible Learning site to support the building of some of the strategies that we're going to talk about. So I know that was kind of a quick portion, but I want us to pause for just a second and do one smart thing. So I want you to drop a comment in the chat. One smart thing that you can pull from this section on evidence-based practices. What's one thing that stuck with you, that drew your attention from this discussion? Maybe it's the idea of the effect sizes. Maybe it was something from that article or the video. Could even be the slide on ESSA and that requirement of using evidence-based intervention. So drop in the chat just one smart thing. Oh, definitely want to take some more time, look into those effect sizes, see what's above that 0.4. Yeah, generally just thinking about evidence-based versus the research-based even. How to use effect sizes. And there's a lot of research out there. And again, this is just one lens for looking through it. We could go down a whole rabbit hole. Brenna, I feel like that would make you very happy to go down a whole rabbit hole about evidence-based practices. Absolutely. Having more instructions about those effect sizes. And some of that information on effect sizes, when you look at it, you're like, oh my gosh, yes, that makes sense. The use of graphic organizers or class discussion or scaffolding, that these things can positively impact students. Absolutely. Focus on what's above the 0.4 strategies and not what I've always done that has worked, right? We know that the strategies we use aren't always going to work from year to year or even class to class or student to student, right? So it's really important that we have information about all of the different tools that we can use and how effective they've been proven to be so that we know what we can go to and why, for sure. All right. That's going to take us to our grade level application. So we want you to have some time to dive into some examples and to talk to one another about how you can use some of this information to impact your planning and instruction. Before we do, I do want to rewind to a slide from our part one. We took a little bit of time during our part one to look at, this is English 1. These are the grade level indicators for 5.3 and 4.1. And these are both standards that we have hosted sessions about for the middle level grades this summer. And I want us to look at those real quick and think about any similarities between the two. Where do we see possible connections between AOR 4.1 and AOR 5.3? Where might you see some similarities or connections? Is there any language that looks similar? Absolutely. Rhetoric and analyzing effectiveness. Absolutely. Yep. Effectiveness, rhetoric. In one case, we're looking at an author's perspective. In the other, we're looking at the author's argument, but both are going to focus on analysis, yes, evaluating that effectiveness and rhetoric. And even though it doesn't explicitly say it in the 4.1, both of these are dealing with informational text. So think about how you could connect these indicators in your planning and instruction, right? Do we have to have different lessons and different activities for every single indicator that we teach, right? Because when we look at our explanation of strands in our standards document, there's a paragraph right at the very end of that explanation of strands that I love, and it says, although our standards are presented in 4 strands, the standards and grade level indicators are not intended to be taught in isolation. right? Rather, they're designed to be grouped in clusters as determined by the educator so students can read, write, and communicate while thinking critically and engaging with other students in an academic setting, right? So that's really important. We don't have to reinvent the wheel for every single piece of instruction for every single indicator, right? We want to intentionally pull things together where we know there can be connection. In this case, that 4.1 and that 5.3, there's a lot of overlap between them. So what I've done for this portion, when we look at some of those instructional resources and examples, you'll see that a couple of those examples have been reworked and adjusted from the 4.1. So instead of creating for some of the grade levels, instead of creating a whole new lesson with a whole new text, a whole new topic, we've taken some of the 4.1 lessons and we've shown how you can adjust it to also meet 5.3. That's intentional to show the importance of purposely combining indicators and resources during instruction, right? It isn't that every indicator needs its own text, topic, or activity, but that we as educators should consider ways to connect things in meaningful ways. As I was building that out, I had a little bit of a discussion with my teammates here, and Mandy actually shared a really great resource that is in the speaker notes of this, but it's on how teaching multiple standards can improve learning and get you through your curriculum, right? All about that intentionality. And there's a quote from it that I wanted to pull because I thought it was really important. It says, while it may sound overwhelming or even impractical to teach multiple standards at once, most college and career ready standards are designed to support such layering. And our 2024 ELA standards are a great example of this. There are a lot of ways that we can build in purposeful connection in our planning and instruction. So just that heads up, when you start looking at some of these and you're like, did we do something about this with 4.1? Yes, we did. But maybe that 4.1 portion is a part one of the lesson and the 5.3 is the part two, or the day one and the day two, that we can build off of these in meaningful ways. So we are going to dive into some examples and we're going to do this in some breakouts. I've been just wanting to do a breakout so bad this whole session and this whole series, but I feel like I keep running out of time. So we are going to do breakouts today. We're going to use our MOP reflection. So you're going to get a copy of the note catcher. And you're also going to get the folder with those instructional examples for each of our grade levels, 5 through English 1. So when we break out into our rooms, I want you to pick whichever of those grade levels you want to explore. And what you'll see is each of the grade levels is going to have a little starting cover page that gives you the grade level indicator, the vocabulary, and then at the bottom, you're going to see the activity with the effect sizes for the different strategies in that activity, and then a little bit of a description. And sometimes the description will give you some additional instruction, like what you might do before the lesson or after the lesson. And as you go through that example with your small group, you're going to use that MOP reflection to think about how that activity could support student mastery of the grade level indicator, where the activity would fall within the overall organization of a unit. Is this something that you would do initially to get them started? Is it something that we might do as a checkpoint part of the way through, or is it something that they might use to demonstrate their mastery at the end? And then consider the prior knowledge that students would need to be able to have to complete that activity. So where should they be coming to you from? Consider that vertical articulation, right? Is there content, skills, language that they're going to need to be able to access in order to complete that activity? Okay, so I'll repeat again. We're going to pop out into your breakout rooms. You're going to pick one of those grade levels from the folder, and then you're going to use that MOP reflection note catcher to gather your thinking. Okay, we're going to, let's see, we'll do about 12 minutes. How's 12 minutes? So we'll come back together at about 3:10. and we'll prepare to share out some of your takeaways. All right. Mandy, are you ready to pop them out? All right. We'll go ahead and move you to your rooms. Welcome back. Thank you for taking just a few minutes to jump into a breakout, look at some of those resources, and have some discussion. Hopefully, you were able to pull some of those different examples, think about the student's mastery, where you might fit that into an instructional unit, and then also what prior knowledge students might need to have in order to access that content. Now, again, these are just examples, right? They're not the end all be all. They're just something to consider, something to look at to support your planning. But I do want to check in with the whole group, and because it is Olympic season, we're going to do that through our USA reflection. I couldn't help myself. So USA reflection, which is use, share, or adapt. So tell me in the chat from your discussions, from your review of those resources, what is an idea that you are excited to use? You feel like I can take this, I know where I might fit it. What could you share with a colleague? So maybe it's not your grade level, but maybe it's something that a teacher down the hall might be able to use. Or maybe you're a coach and there's something that you can use there to support your teachers. Or what's there that you could adapt? Maybe you've got something there that with a little bit of tweaking could align to something that you already do, or something that you were already planning. So drop in the chat something you could use, share, or adapt. And I'm just taking a look. The 7th grade lesson on cell phone bans. Yes, and that was one that was a 4.1 that I adapted with the annotation piece. Absolutely. Oh, the commercial cards. Remember in 6th grade, all they're doing is just identifying, right? They're not doing anything else but identifying those rhetorical appeals or types of reasoning. So using those cards for identification, the jigsaw for the appeals. Absolutely. Like to use the 7th grade to help clarify the vocabulary in the standard. Yes. So the 5th grade example is pulling in everything that they've already done up to that grade. So the claims, evidence, reasoning or reasons, all of that is incorporated there. So pulling in a lot of that prior knowledge. Use the commercial analysis, aligns with something you've already been planning as part of your GT summer course. Fantastic. Yes, yes. And that actually is something that I used to do with my 9th graders. When it was Super Bowl time, we'd pull out those Super Bowl commercials and start doing some review of those rhetorical appeals. AI and education could share with your department, and that's another one that we adapted from the 4.1, where they're looking at, with the 4.1, the perspectives, but then with the 5.3, we're looking at the moves that that author makes. Using the ads and commercials. Let's see. The jigsaw, yes, could be used at any grade level, absolutely. And it's really what they're doing with the jigsaw that is going to be that grade level specific. Fantastic. And I'm so glad that you found some of the resources to be engaging and of interest. And remember, when students are looking at these resources, giving them that variety is really important. So in some cases, we had commercials. In some cases, we had advertisements. In some cases, we had articles. So that variety is also very, very helpful if we're making sure they really mastered those skills with a variety of content. Okay. So that's going to take us to our clarity and closure portion. So our purpose today was to explore those instructional strategies. Oh, and Jessica, I'm so glad you saw all those landing pages. So every single session, we build a landing page with all of those different resources, and hopefully, yes, you can take those and use those or share them with your colleagues, because it is built around the topic of that particular session. So we've explored instructional strategies for application of reading 5.3 for those grades 5 through 9 or English 1, if you have 8th graders taking English 1, in order to enhance instruction and improve student outcomes. So in the chat, tell me one way that this purpose was met. How did we meet our purpose for today? Was it an activity? Was it a reading? Was it just a topic that we discussed? The folder. I'm so glad you love the folders, y'all. Those have been a lot of work this summer, building out all those different resources. Opportunity to explore the resources, absolutely. The different activities, the evidence-based resources, yes. So pulling in those, whatever those activities are, and then giving those effect sizes for the different strategies within those activities. Sharing the resources, learning how to apply them across grade levels. Wonderful. Okay, so that answers my big question, which is, did we meet our purpose for today? And I'm glad it sounds like we did. Love to hear it. Okay. And then that is going to take us into our very last reflection piece before we move into feedback. And that is our new, now, next. So as we close out this session and you start moving into your upcoming school year, many of you are in the room right now, or you are going back tomorrow and already you're having some of those back to school nightmares. Think about your new, now, next, right? So what new information did you learn from our time together? What does this learning have you thinking about now? And what are your next steps? How will you apply that learning? So consider that new, now, next. You don't have to write out every single piece, but maybe you have that next. And drop that in the chat. Drop anything from the new, the now, or the next. So I can kind of see where we're at. What are you thinking about? What did you learn? Do you have some next steps that you feel like you can walk away with and use as you're preparing for your back to school? Or actually, some of you may be back to school. Some districts started last week. Audra, using the correct terminology, the effect sizes, adapting those teaching styles to include things that are over that hinge point, maybe more research into that model, incorporating the researches into your planning. Oh, Carla, yes, devise a system to share all summer webinars with teachers. We will actually be updating our professional learning library. All of our recordings we post on the professional learning library. And then we also keep an internal version of that has all the resources on it. So if there is anything that you would like us to share with you, just let us know and we will get that to you. Sharing with the team, yes, absolutely. Any of these resources that that you would like to share and adapt, that is there for you. Mandy, how can you borrow any of the things you learned in this summer series for your elementary instructional support? Yes, because we're already thinking about the fall and already starting to make plans for that. So how can we take some of this and use that to support those grade bands? A lot of ideas you can use. Excited to jump into planning activities, include resources with the leaders, the examples, share. Yes, please share. That is what it is here for, is for you to share and use. So fantastic. I love to hear that you've got some new learnings and things you're thinking about, and then some next steps that you could take. All right, so we are going to go ahead and drop in our feedback form. This is the last portion that we will need for your recertification credit. That just lets us know you were here at the end of the session today. I am Casey Prince Harvey. Title of the session was AOR 5.3 Part 2. And we really do use this feedback to tailor our professional development, lets us know how we can improve to better support our educators across the state, everyone that we serve. So take just a couple minutes to fill that out. It's real quick. And then once we have all that information, we'll follow up within this week with your recertification certificate. And then once we get the recording uploaded onto YouTube, we'll get that link back to you and we'll share that back out as well as the landing page. And then I have here the topics for all of our summer sessions for the middle level, so you can see any of those. If there was something that you weren't able to make, but you were interested in, maybe you wanted the recording or any of those resources, just let us know. We'd be happy to get that information shared to you. But other than that, we're going to take a few minutes to just linger and listen. So if you have any questions or if you need help troubleshooting something, just let us know and we would be happy to help. But once you're done with your form, you are good to go. And I thank you so much for, again, taking your Tuesday afternoon to come and hang out with us and talk about some standards and some instruction. And hopefully we see you soon. And either way, we hope you have a great start to your school year. So thank you so much. Y'all have a great afternoon.